So recently I made a post on Telegram about a place that I have branded the Cozy COVID Corner, and it was quite well received, so I thought I would expand on it further here today. Now, the Cozy COVID Corner is a place where anything goes, where any conspiracy theory, any recently discovered plot by the elites, or any half-baked idea is taken with the utmost seriousness and is discussed and pored over as if it has great merit. So you can talk about nanobots in the jabs, you can talk about lizard people running the earth, you can talk about 5G towers frying your brain, and you can talk about supposed secret underground bases run by military factions supporting Donald Trump, which are of course just days away from carrying out a military coup, and all of these things are taken seriously. But wait a minute, there are a couple of taboos in Cozy COVID Corner, and one of these forbidden subjects is that of the Great Replacement. Yes, that's right, discussion of the replacement of people of European descent via mass immigration and births from the migrant population is heavily frowned upon and can quickly get you banned. But this might seem strange, as all of these COVID conspiracy pages that have popped up like mushrooms in a sea full of bull excrement constantly reference Agenda 2030, the Soros NGOs, the World Economic Forum, and the Great Reset. But all of these pages conveniently choose to ignore that mass immigration and the replacement of people of European descent is a central pillar of all of those groups and plans. These so-called truthers who sit comfortably in the Cozy COVID Corner will entertain almost any bizarre theory, but the mere mention of white people becoming a minority can result in much wailing and moaning and earn you an instant ban, as the regular contributors run for cover and hit that report button for fear of the worst fate known to man befalling them or their precious group. That fate is, of course, being called racist. But those in COVID Conspiracy Corner will never admit their behaviour is based upon fear. Instead, they love to justify their complete denial of the replacement of the white race by saying things such as, "Don't let them divide us by race." This statement is really nothing more than a weak plea by those who are desperate not to be branded racist by the establishment. It is their way of showing that they are colourblind, or race compliant, and it is often followed by an even more stupid statement along the lines of, "The elites are trying to divide us by race, and we must all stand together if we are going to survive." This is pure nonsense. The elites, the same people behind Agenda 2030, those who are leading members of the World Economic Forum, and all those in seats of media, establishment or institutional power, have openly advocated for, and continue to advocate for, mass immigration into Western nations for the exact purpose of dividing white communities and creating conflict. In 1950, there was fewer than 20,000 non-whites living in Britain. That accounted for just 0.04% of the population. Mass immigration since 1950 has increased this number to over 8 million, according to the last census that took place in 2011. And as we are now in 2022, this number is likely to be far higher, and we will see just how bad things really are when the 2021 census results are finally released. Now, it's also worth noting that the racially homogeneous nature of Britain was not a unique trait of these islands. Nearly all white nations were overwhelmingly ethnically homogeneous at the end of the Second World War. Mass non-white immigration into the West has been pushed upon us not only to replace and displace people of European descent, but also to break up our ethnically homogeneous white communities by introducing diversity in order to separate and atomise white people. This has been a policy that has been pushed relentlessly by these so-called elites. It is a central pillar of their plan. Diversity has been pushed upon white nations, not so we can come together with the migrants and defeat the elites as those in Cozy COVID Corner naively advocate for, but because diversity does the opposite of bringing people together. It separates people, it creates conflict, and it breaks up cohesive nations. But you may have noticed something else. The inhabitants of COVID Conspiracy Corner constantly talk of freedom of speech. Yet mass immigration and the growth of immigrant communities within the West has led to some of the most restrictive speech laws Western nations have ever witnessed. These laws specifically prevent white people speaking out in defense of their own racial group, whilst at the same time, other legislation has been passed that has placed non-white ethnic groups on a pedestal and has given them priority over white people, essentially turning white people into second-class citizens who aren't even legally allowed to discuss the relentless attacks upon their ethnic group. This anti-whiteism is another tool of the elites, but again, it is something those in COVID circles like to ignore. But one very important thing to note about the Great Replacement is that it is visually observable. You don't need to spend hours watching long-form videos or reading dozens of books to understand or see what is going on. You don't need to take intellectual leaps of faith, and there are no glaring holes in the evidence when it comes to the changing nature of the ethnic makeup of Western nations. You only need to look at migration figures, data on the changing demographic makeup of the country, or simply just take a walk around almost any city centre to see what is happening. In fact, here in Britain, you could just take a trip to Dover and literally watch the invasion of our island happen in real time, with the invaders being welcomed by the establishment lackeys on the beach before they are whisked away to a 4-star hotel at the taxpayer's expense. But whilst the moderators in Cozy COVID Corner are busily bringing down the ban hammer upon those who talk about white genocide, they will happily entertain utterly laughable ideas about the elites using 5G towers to kill off the population. So let's have a look at this particular theory and see if it holds water, and we will use the example of Britain, because that's where I live. Now, where in Britain is there the largest concentration of 5G towers? The answer is London. So if 5G towers really are powerful death rays that are going to cause our brains to melt and dribble out of our ears, who is going to be the most affected? Well, London regularly houses all of Britain's top politicians, top civil servants, lobbyists, and those in the highest seats of institutional power. London is also the largest financial centre in the whole of Europe, and the second largest in the world, home to a massive number of the most influential and powerful bankers and financiers. London is one of the homes of the Rothschilds. It hosts Bilderberg meetings, and is one of the central nodes for those who run some of the world's most powerful institutions and companies. Companies such as BlackRock. London is also home to the Bank of England, and those who control the country's economy. London is also where the head of the media snake resides. The BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Sky News, and numerous foreign-owned media assets are all based in Britain's capital. The High Court and the most powerful members of the judiciary are also all based in London. And that all goes without mentioning the captains of industry, the billionaires, the millionaires, the celebrities, the influencers, as well as current and former world leaders that have either made the city their home or visit it regularly. So it's fair to say that London is a place where a vastly disproportionate number of the global elite and their closest allies live and work. Yet London is also the place with the largest number of 5G masts in Britain. Does anyone not see the contradiction here? The idea that the global elite are about to use 5G towers to fry us all, yet at the same time have placed the largest concentration of these 5G towers where they and their operations are based, makes the theory completely laughable. And as an aside to this, London also contains around 37% of Britain's foreign-born population. and is only 43% white British, meaning the globalists would not only be killing themselves and their lackeys off, but also killing a massive chunk of the immigrant population. Conversely, the places with the fewest 5G towers are rural areas that are almost completely white. So according to some in Cozy COVID Corner, the globalists' master plan is to kill themselves off, destroy all their institutional power, and at the same time reverse the demographic replacement of white Britons via the use of 5G brain-frying death rays.
Not a great plan.
But despite the globalists' 5G master plan being held up by many in Cozy COVID Corner as a credible idea, talk of the absolutely verifiable and quantifiable white replacement that we can see with our very own eyes is completely taboo. And let me explain why this is. It's because the COVID conspiracy bunch are fundamentally terrified of being called racist. They want to think of themselves as rebels, but ultimately they never want to stray onto ground that would actually ensure that they ended up in the crosshairs of the establishment, as real rebels do. You see, ultimately, you can talk all day about 5G towers melting your brain without any real consequences. But start talking about the plight of white people, start talking about white replacement or anti-white discrimination, and it won't be long before those elites and their proxies will start accusing you of being a racist, and then there are real repercussions. There is a reason that you can sit talking about 5G to your heart's content without any social or legal consequences. Yet at the same time, hate speech laws exist in order to criminalise talk about demographic change. But most tellingly, the elites that are so often discussed in Cozy COVID Corner pour billions of pounds each year into pushing mass immigration, promoting diversity, creating an anti-white environment, pushing white guilt, and creating an oppressive surveillance state where criticising mass immigration and fighting for white rights is one of the greatest taboos, just as it is in those COVID groups on Telegram.